we have arrived at the look deving stage. The first asset we're going to tackle is the table. I'll select the table, so hit S on the keyboard, select it, or use the isolation tool. Unlock the camera, move around in the perspective view, frame this right up, something like that, and I'll control click on the camera. That creates a camera from the current perspective. Space G to frame up. We'll call this look dev. Control X, let's cut it, paste it up here. We'll change the resolution, I think, to 1000 by 1000. Make sure we're in the camera here. Lock it, and now we can move around. I'll just frame that up a little bit better. I think I'll set my focal length to about 50mm to reduce distortion. To make this faster, we're going to turn the sunlight off and those other lights. When I'm look deving my assets, I usually just light them using a sky dome. Set the table, Space G, so we can see where it is in the object context. We'll drop down an RS material, a material network for our material to live in. Copy the name of the object, paste it. I usually add something like mat to say it's a material network afterwards. Drop down an RS material. This material will be called wood. BRDF to GGX. I usually do this for most of my shaders. Drop the base properties down. Drop down an RS texture to import our albedo map. So I'm going to go to E, Digital Assets Library, Textures, Wood, and we're going to use a Megascans wood texture. It's called Wood Veneer, so you can grab that from Megascans. And albedo. I'm going to right click on this RS texture and I'm set node name from file. And I don't think this option ships with Houdini. I think this script is from a guy called Jonathan Block, who created like a really cool OpenGL redshift shader that allows you to view your materials in the viewport. I'm not actually using this right now. I tend to do most of my look deving with the render view open, but that is a really handy tool. So let's plug this into the diffuse color. We'll plug the out color from the RS material into a redshift material, which is essentially the same thing as a shading group in Maya, and this goes right at the end of the chain. Call this wood, and here we'll call this, I think we'll call this table wood out to say this is at the end of the chain. Then we can drag this and drop it onto the table. For some reason in this scene that doesn't seem to be working for me. I think there's maybe a bug or something, or some issue that I've caused that doesn't allow me to drop it. So another way we can do this is by looking for it there. Let's jump back into the material network, open up the render view, the Redshift tab. You can also open it from here. I've already done some tests prior to this. Select the look dev camera. We're not going to change the lighting ROP. It's already pretty fast. So that gives us this. So you can see it's super shiny. Just going to scale that, something around there. I'm going to click on the RS texture, Alt, left click, drag, and that will duplicate it. Let's browse for the roughness map. Right click, set node name from file. save me from individually setting the scales on these textures, what I'll do is copy the parameter here, so X, and I'll copy it to Y. So X and Y are linked, so if I scale this, this goes up as well. And then I'll copy the scale parameters from the albedo map and paste them to the roughness map. I'll also do the same for the offset. And that just means that I don't have to go through every single RS texture and change the scale, offset, and rotation. I can just do it on the albedo and it will sort of daisy chain all the way down. So we only have to sort of reset it once. Like that. So let's plug in the roughness map into the roughness slot. And if you're working with glossy maps, then what you do is you'd add an RS invert. Sorry, an RS invert afterwards. Or you can use this function or the feature here saying convert from glossiness to roughness, which basically just inverts the map. Usually I'd prefer to work with roughness maps. It's just a personal preference. So you can see instantly that's had a much better result. It's looking pretty cool. Let's drop down an RS normal map. And I think this is actually legacy now. I think it's old. It's outdated. I think the new way of doing this is dropping down an RS bump and plugging the normal map into the tangent space normal, but that's something I'm going to need to double check for you guys. So we use the old method, plug in the normal, plug that into the bump input. And I think I'll turn this up to something like 3, something. Let's zoom in so we can actually see the detail here. Doesn't seem to be making too much of a difference there. Maybe a little bit. I think 2 should be enough. And what we can do to add even more breakup into the reflection is by multiplying another roughness map with the current wood roughness map, and that's going to give us even more breakup. So let's plug this roughness map into the shading group right at the end. So we're just viewing the roughness map on its own now. Let's drop down an RS texture and we're going to import a grunge map from Megascans. And it's called Imperfections TED WD EVC. Load it in. I'm going to show you what this looks like. Looks like that. It's really cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to take an RS multiply node and we're going to multiply this texture by this texture. Which gives us that. So before we had, let's take a snapshot. So we're going to take the wood roughness, view it. So a before and after, so before with the wood, after with the grunge map multiplied in with the wood. You can see our values are getting way too black, and what that means is if the blacker the values, the glossier or shinier this material is going to be. So what we need to do is lift up these white values in this grunge map. So whenever I'm dropping down an RS change range, I'll restart the render. Let's plug this back in so we can see the result. And watch what happens as I lift up the new range minimum. And if I put this to 1, this basically means that nothing's happening now. We're just basically doing a multiplication of 1 times by 1, which equals 1. Whereas if we drop this value lower, then we're doing this map, which is 1 times by 0.89, which equals 0.89. I think we'll try something like that, I think. See what that looks like. Plug it back in. I think we could add some contrast to this. And the way I add contrast to my maps is messing around with the old range min and old range max. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift or drag back the white levels. So moving this down will increase those white levels. And lifting up the old range min will increase the black levels. Just like that. Let's view it again. See what it looks like. So let's see some interesting change in reflection there, which is nice. You could also do the same and increase the contrast on the wood roughness map. So let's try that. So you can see it there. So we don't want to push this up too much, but we kind of want to make that stand out a little bit more. Looks a little bit more interesting. Let's switch so we can see the before and after. So there you go. Actually, I can bypass it here. So you can see we've added contrast to that map now. Let's view the result. So you can see we've multiplied in our grunge. So that's looking kind of cool. Getting some interesting breakup there, which is nice. That's just adding a nice amount of detail to the roughness. Let's take a look around the object. I want to see what the top looks like as well. I think overall it's looking pretty nice. What you could do right at the end of this chain, let's say for example the result was too glossy, it was too shiny, you could add an RS change range right at the end of this block. Let's restart the render. So nothing's changed as we haven't changed anything on the change range. So we've saved a snapshot. And let's just put the minimum, the new range minimum to 0.5. So that means our black levels have been lifted from 0 up to 0.5, and that's essentially the same as sliding this roughness slider up to 0.5. So this is saying the minimum roughness values are 0.5 and the maximum roughness values are 1. So that is just really washed the whole image out, and we've diffused that roughness too much. So we can set this back down to something like 0.1. You can see as I raise this, it's getting rougher. Let's put it back down to 0. See the effect. And I think that actually kind of looks cool. Maybe we could go 0.7 or something, just to soften that a little bit. I think something like that works quite well. Maybe 0.125. And we can always refine this later, but I think overall that's looking pretty cool. Let's zoom in and we're going to add some dirt now. So we'll drop down another RS material. We'll call this one dirt. BRDF to GGX. We'll change the color to sort of like a muddy brown color. Make it pretty dark. Like that. I think somewhere around this range. We'll make this sort of around 0.85 roughness. We're going to blend between these two materials. So we're going to drop down an RS material blender. We're going to plug the wood into the base. And we're going to put the dirt on top. Let's plug that in. And you'll notice nothing happens, even if we restart. And that's because we need to give this material blender a mask. So the mask defines where the dirt is on this surface. So I'm going to take an RS curvature node. Let's plug this into the table wood out, just so we can see the result. I'll change the samples, I think, to 64. And we'll change this to concave, I think. We'll reduce the radius down, so you can see what's happening here. Like that. So I think that looks pretty cool. It's giving quite a nice result there. You may need to increase the samples here, but just remember this is going to really increase your render times right at the end. That's going to really slow it down, so just be mindful of this. I probably usually wouldn't go past 64, but 128 seems about right there. Let's Alt left click and drag. So we've done this curvature based on concave, and we're going to do this one based on convex. So let's view that. That gives us this result. We'll turn this down to like 32, and we're just going to restart the render actually. I'm just going to really reduce this number until we get this kind of result. I think 64 samples seems about right. So that's looking kind of cool. Let's zoom out. Yeah, I think that looks quite nice. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take an RS add. So we're going to add these white values together. Doesn't matter which way around they go. So we've added those values together now. And overall, the dirt, or the mask for the dirt, is looking very uniform. There's no breakup in it. So we'll reuse our grunge texture map. Alt drag that down. We'll drop down an RS multiply, and we're going to multiply in the values from this grunge map. We're going to multiply them with our RS curvature. So that gives us this. It looks like we need to increase the contrast of this map. So let's restart the render, and we're just going to increase the contrast here. So we get this kind of result. Just looking kind of nice. So all that nice breakup there. Just looking really cool. If the white values are a little bit too low, we can pump this up. Bring those values back up. We can also increase the contrast even more. I think that's creating a really interesting result there. So let's view that. We'll see what it looks like. And it's not looking very obvious, which is kind of good. I guess if you were close up to this thing, you wouldn't want it to look that obvious. But seeing as though we're far away... Oh, actually, we've not actually applied the mask yet, which is why we can't see it. So that would make sense. So let's apply this in the blend color. So wherever's white from this mask, there'll be dirt. So that's looking really cool. Yeah, I think that's looking nice. We can also add some dust on top, so I'll Alt left click to copy. We'll call this one dust. Change this to sort of like a nice creamy whitey kind of color. I think something around that value. Keep the roughness the same. We'll plug this into layer 2, so the dust is the most top layer. Let's plug that in. I'm going to move these out so you guys can read the network a little bit better. There's nothing worse than a really messy network. There you go. And like we did before, we need a mask to define this. So why not use the same grunge map? Let's view this, see what it looks like. It's looking kind of cool. But I don't want that much dust, so wherever is white, there's going to be dust. So we need to increase the black levels in that case. So increasing the black levels will remove the amount of white from this mask, resulting in less dust. So like we did before, this is how we increase the contrast. So if you want to add more black, you lift up this 0 level. I'm kind of noticing that maybe this is not holding up very well, the texture. It looks like it's not high resolution enough, so we'll tile it by 2. I think that's looking a little bit better. Let's increase the contrast even more. And I think that's looking kind of nice. Let's actually tile this. Let's go again. Maybe by 5. Maybe we've done a little bit too much there. I think that's looking kind of cool. Let's actually go in and we're going to select the dust imperfection. Let's preview that and see what it looks like, because I don't think this is holding up very well. It doesn't look like dust. So that's looking a lot better. That looks more like dust. So let's use that roughness map instead. Turn this back to 1. And I think that's looking a lot better. Yeah, that looks more like dust. Let's plug this into the blend slot on the blend color 2. We'll plug this in to there. You may need to boost up the white values from here to make that mask more visible. I'm going to turn this up to like 12 just to demonstrate. See the dust kicking in there. I think the color could be a little bit more saturated, a little bit brighter. Like there. And now we can just turn this maximum white value down to something like 2. 1.25. Yeah, I kind of like that. It's looking cool. I think maybe we've made this a little bit too rough, this surface here. So I'm just going to drop that back down to about 0.05. Or even 0. And I think that's picking up a little bit of a nicer reflection there. Feels more wood-like. I'm going to zoom in down to here. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty damn cool. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring out this grunge map in the roughness of the wood a little bit more. I just don't think it's strong enough. So take a snapshot. Let's put this back down to 0 so we can see the effect it's having. Turn the white values up to 0.5. Drop those black values down. And that probably seems a little bit confusing what I'm doing. We're using the same techniques that we've done. It's just I've done this so many times before using RS change ranges. You find after a while that you don't even need to sort of look at the image. You can just sort of gauge it by changing the texture. So I'm going to drop this slider down. That's going to increase the white levels. We can even increase the contrast at this level here. So you can see here I've raised the black levels up and it's gotten glossier. We can drop this slider down to lift up those white levels. So now we're getting more contrast. It's looking kind of cool. So maybe we can drop this down to 0.05. And we'll do a comparison with what we had before. So you can see there, we're just adding a little bit of contrast just to make that reflection stand out just a little bit more, which I think looks pretty cool. Let's zoom out, see what it looks like as a whole. Yep, I think I'm happy with it. That's a job well done. So I think what we'll do now is we'll move on to the next asset.